What Really Happened with your host, Mike Rivero. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Tuesday, February 12th, 2019. Remember, Thursday is Valentine's Day. Make the appropriate plans or face the wrath of your significant other. So anyway, we've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. It's been a very busy news day. No danger of running out of material today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone, put you on the air with your comments, questions, and observations. And a little bit of an apology up front. I picked up just a little bit of a head cold, so I'm dealing with that. It's not too bad, though. Anyway, the big news right now is supposedly there is a tentative deal to avoid another government shutdown, although Trump isn't really fully on board with it just yet. And apparently the offer that is on the table coming from the Democrats is about $1.4 billion towards physical barriers, but not a wall. And it would include about 55 new miles of bollard fencing. That's the fencing that's made out of these steel bars that come out of the ground. And the agreement would also reduce the cap for immigration and customs enforcement detention beds by about 17%. And it's a raw deal. And I can understand why Trump is not happy with it. 55 miles? So the people smugglers only have to drive, what, another hour? It's really not going to solve the problem. It's just another way for the Democrats to try and keep those borders open. And the budget deal is basically, it falls short. Now, Trump may not sign this deal because he is still sticking by his demand for $5.7 billion to build over 200 miles of wall along the southern border. And again, back in 1997, I think it was, there was a bill passed by Congress and signed into law that funded 700 miles of border fencing, of which only 33 was built. And I'd like to know how that came about. Where did that money go? Who was it who pulled the plug on that particular project? Anyway, so Trump is out there saying he can't say he's thrilled with the reported border security compromise. And so we'll see if he's going to sign it or not, although saying that he's not thrilled, it's kind of a tepid response. I would have expected something a little bit more forceful, like, that's not what I need. That's not what the country needs. Sean Hannity immediately took to the air and said, don't accept this garbage border wall proposal. And he just slammed this tentative agreement and urged Republicans not to accept the compromise. So basically, Democrats are seeking to control how ICE conducts the business of enforcing the law within our country. Of course, some of those members of Congress don't even know the law. Remember, a while back, Hawaii's own Mazie Hirono was totally unaware that it's illegal to just step over the border and come into this country. Apparently, she kept hearing the phrase illegal immigrants and it didn't register. Now, Trump is out there saying, ultimately, whatever this deal is going to be doesn't really matter because we're building the wall anyway. Strong words. Now, we do know he's got options. He's got the national emergency route. And remember, the Pentagon says they've got the money and the Corps of Engineers. They can build that wall. And if I were Trump, I would go with that option. I would definitely go with that option. Trump was out there saying walls are moral. They're not a bad thing at all. And, of course, the Democrats have the completely different point of view. Walls are immoral, or say all these Democratic politicians who have walls around their own homes, I might add. There are walls around Fort Knox. There are walls around the Vatican. Walls are a good thing. And Trump went on to say that all this other technology doesn't really mean a thing. They just need the wall. The problem with technology is it has to be maintained. It has to be powered. Once you build the wall, I mean, there's going to be a little bit of maintenance over the years, but it's just going to stay there. And it's not high demand, high labor. So, anyway, getting on to the international news. We'll come back to domestic politics in a little bit here, but it does look like the U.S. is preparing for a military intervention in Venezuela. And apparently, on February 10th, Venezuela launched a large-scale military drills, which will run until this Friday. They're the largest drills ever held in the country's 200-year history. And on the same day, multiple air defense systems, including Pechora 2M launchers, were spotted maneuvering in the area of San Cristobal, near the border with Colombia, who's expected to be a member of the U.S.-led coalition in the event of an invasion of Venezuela. Well, if that's true, then they're talking about basically just coming across the border from Colombia, which, I got to tell you, it will be a new Vietnam. And I think the United States, based on these weapons that were being smuggled in that airplane and who knows what all else, that the U.S. may instead go the Syria route. Just cook up a bunch of so-called freedom fighter groups or jihadis or whatever the Venezuelan equivalent is and sick them on Maduro. But apparently on February 7th, Israel's satellite company ImageSat International released an image showing the Venezuelan military was releasing its S-300VN air defense system from mothballs in Captain Manuel Rios Air Base. So everybody's getting serious, and they know what's going on here. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Now, Guido says he is working to restore ties with Israel, that basically Caracas cut off a decade ago in solidarity with the Palestinians. And right there is your motive for Netanyahu to come on out and demand that Maduro step down. Because Israel doesn't like any country that shows solidarity with the Palestinians. It is not to be allowed. So Israel, of course, is one of the countries that recognize Guido as the new Venezuelan leader, after he just stood up and said, I'm the new leader, honest, really, honest. Okay, according to Carlos Rafael Faraya Tortosa, Venezuela's ambassador to Russia, Juan Guido was recruited by the United States 10 years ago, and he's already known to be Washington's puppet. Hamid Karzai all over again. And apparently he was recruited 10 years ago. He was sent to Serbia to study and basically came back to Venezuela and has been working his way into the political establishment. One call from Mike Pence, Guido stands up. Guido was activated is basically the term that they're using. Guido was activated and we're ready to go. Now, I want to talk about that bridge between Venezuela and Colombia, where the media made a big deal of the fact that Venezuela blocked their end of the bridge. And they made a big stink about, oh, he's blocking this U.S. humanitarian aid to his starving people. How could he do that? And the story really didn't make sense, because why would the U.S. be sending humanitarian aid into a country they're attempting to starve into submission? Well, as it turns out, the bridge wasn't open to traffic to begin with. It's blocked at the Colombian end. It's not being used. Just more war propaganda. And a lot of people are chastising the fact checkers and all these corporate news outlets that carried this story about, oh, they're blocking the humanitarian aid, because apparently it didn't take too much to discover the bridge was not in use. But then, of course, the corporate media doesn't check the facts. They're just interested in selling you stuff. A new car, a new watch, a new president, a new war. Max Blumenthal went up to Congress with a video camera and started asking members of Congress, is the U.S. meddling in Venezuela? And you've got to see the video, because the responses just have this picture of ignorance, hypocrisy, but it also underscores almost universal bipartisan consent for the Trump administration's assault on Venezuela, or whoever idea this is. I don't think Trump came up with this idea to go into Venezuela. I think it was created for him, and he's just been convinced to go along with it. Isn't it amazing? You see Congress constantly fighting back and forth with these narrow votes and everything. But on two issues, they always vote unanimously. More stuff for Israel and another war. Because why do they have to worry? They're not paying for it. Their kids don't fight in it. Now, actor and activist Danny Glover came out with a video talking about the conflict over Venezuela in the context of this long history of U.S.-led coups in Latin America. And the U.S. has been messing around down there for decades. There have even been movies made about it, like The Year of Living Dangerously. And again, continued right up to the 1980s when they were mucking about Nicaragua, which led to that whole Iran-Contra scandal. Okay, now, over in Geneva at their School of Diplomacy, they have a professor of international law, Alfred de Zayas, and his analysis is that he does not see it possible Guaido can take over. What he predicts is going to happen to Venezuela, which has already suffered enough, there'll be a civil war triggered. And I'm afraid he's right about that here. Over in Israel, they have launched missiles and fired artillery into Syria's Quneitra province, destroying an observation post and striking the site of an already demolished hospital. Now, details on what happened are unclear. Israel is refusing to comment, and Syria is saying there was damage but no casualties. And Syria has been openly attacking Syria for months now. It usually focuses on the capital city of Damascus or the Golan Heights, but hitting Quneitra largely stopped after the Israeli armed rebels in that area were defeated. But I guess they're thinking about going back in there. Meanwhile, Russia has condemned these airstrikes in Syria as unlawful and basically says Israel's practice of declaring everything it hits as an alleged Iranian target is totally illegitimate. If you don't know what that target is, you shouldn't be launching here. So Deputy Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov said that Israeli airstrikes on Syria are unlawful and unfounded. He then backed off and said Israel's security is very important to Moscow. So he's talking out of both sides of his mouth here. Okay, another little report, this one coming out of Jerusalem Post. Israel has apparently sent troops into Afghanistan to set up an intelligence operation to collect data on Iranian military movement. And apparently, according to Iran's Tasnim news agency, Israeli troops are operating out of a United States Air Force base in Shindand in the western Afghanistan province of Herat, some 75 kilometers from the Iranian border. And I'm going to take a guess here that they're setting up radars and drones to just keep an eye on where Iran's forces are. Again, laying the groundwork for a potential invasion here. In Israel itself, Netanyahu is still struggling with declining poll numbers for the upcoming elections. A lot of people are saying there's clearly blood in the water. We're still waiting to hear if the Attorney General is going to bring down those indictments. But Prime Minister Netanyahu's party issued a campaign ad that basically engages in race baiting. And it chides the left for siding with Arabs, which is what Israel likes to call the Palestinian citizens, as well as Palestinians in general. And the ad is implying that Netanyahu's chief rival, Benny Gantz, is depending on the support of the left and the Palestinian political parties. So we'll see what happens there. Okay, got a caller on the line. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, right behind you under your desk, I see Iranian, Russian, and a member of Hezbollah hiding under.
Oh, okay. Can you take out the trash as long as you're there? All right.
What a joke this is, isn't it? I
Yes.
mean, the Iranians are here. You know, the Hezbollah is over in Venezuela. You know, the Russians are, interfering with, the yellow, vest. You know, I mean, this is what we've become, Mike. Like,
Yes.
It's just propaganda and propaganda. I said it once, I'll say it again, Mike. There's not going to be an invasion per se. It'll be like a covert operation where they would sneak people through the jungles by Colombia or Brazil. Remember, there was a report, Brazil, did you hear like there was Israelis that were supposedly brought into Brazil? Because I know Bolsonaro supports Israel right now. I mean, that was the whole thing. Didn't he say like Jerusalem is their capital now, I think? Was that it?
Yeah.
Where his brother was caught with a Mossad T-shirt or something like that. You know, don't you find that odd how all of a sudden these people come in and they're all pro-Israel, or they're wearing like a Mossad shirt, or I don't get it. Like, why? How can Israel have so much power over? It boggles my mind.
They've got control of the money, and money is power. And you know, I mean, look at this this big stink about what's her name, Omar, where she said, you know, American politics is, you know, controlled by AIPAC, and it's all about the Benjamins. And what a fury has erupted there, because, you know, the game's, and it's not like we all don't already know that's what's going on. That politicians basically are in office to make themselves rich, and they stay in office by accepting campaign contributions for which they must do favors. And Israel is a master at manipulating money around the globe. They're also a master at blackmail and various other forms of persuasion. And, you know, they're very good at the game. There's no question about it.
Has it always been like this, you think? Like before even Israel existed, this kind of...
Yeah, I mean, going all the way back to like Harry Truman. Harry Truman, you know, was basically pushed to recognize the state of Israel by pro-Israel support inside Washington, D.C.
And Mike, with Trump, like, what's the deal coming out? Like, it says 55 miles of barrier.
Yeah.
Not wall, like a barrier. Is that like a white picket fence with Nancy Pelosi cutting the grass in front of it?
No, it's a bollard wall, which is going to be very formidable, but it's not the concrete wall that Donald Trump wanted. And unfortunately, with steel costing more than concrete, he's getting less wall for his money than he otherwise would have. But again, I mean, if they just set up that wall someplace at an immigration hotspot where the immigrants are coming through, that divides the link effectively in two. And that means the human traffickers only have to drive, 27 miles either way. And they'll be able to drop their passengers off. I mean, it's nothing. It's a token fence. And it's totally meaningless. If you can have 1,000 miles of fence, but if you leave 10 miles open somewhere, the illegal immigrant problem continues.
And what's the point of him doing it then? Like, what, Mike, what happens after he leaves? Like, what happens to, like, if the money is funded for the wall, when he leaves, after 4 years, if he doesn't get reelected, say, what happens to that money or the wall? It's going to disappear if a Democrat comes in, right?
It probably will, but I would hope that the wall would get built in the next 2 years. But you raise a very good point that the next incoming president, if it's a Democrat, or an independent, yeah, they could turn around and say, no more wall. In fact, tear down the ones we already have.
You know, Mike, I look at the wall as like the next step. Your house protection, your door, your car door closed at night when you go to sleep. You don't leave your door wide open. Well, the border wall is the first protection. Now, that's not the most important thing to me, though. I mean, the border wall is important, but it was for all the wars to stop. And like I said, Trump, not only is it disappointing, Mike, but he's just, everything he's running on, he's backtracking, or it's a lesser amount than what he started with. Like, it's nothing.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, if he does cave on this wall and accepts just 55 miles of it, it'll be symbolic, but he can't campaign on that in 2020. Anyway, Dustin, stay on the line. We've got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're on the phone with Dustin in New Jersey. And Dustin, it seems I can't see how Trump can salvage his presidency at this point. And, of course, just now on Fox News, they had somebody saying, well, Trump is planning to use executive action to get the wall that he really wants. But it's words. I'm not seeing things get done that we were told were going to get done. I'm not seeing any progress being made on vaccine safety. I know Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is out there doing the best that he can. We're not seeing any progress on honest, verifiable elections in this country. That's not happening. We're certainly not seeing any progress on getting out of all of these wars that we're stuck in all over the planet. Okay.
Mike, Fox News. Remember with George Bush in Iraq? They went along with that too. So I don't trust Fox News, just like I don't trust CNN, MSNBC. I don't trust any of them because you know what? Trump ordered the deal. It's ordered the sham. Yeah, like everything he ran on is nothing. We got nothing. Nothing, Mike. Like this I'm sorry, compromised or not, but if you're going to run. When he ran for office, everything he said, nothing's coming. No, there's nothing there.
Yeah, and it seems like he just wanted to be president so he could say he was president. And I don't see him actually doing the job. I don't see him really being a leader. We're not seeing that management superstar that we saw on The Apprentice. He's just kicking back and having his executive time, and he's letting the government run itself. And I got to tell you, having spent some time as a rag setter, you got to keep your hands on that wheel. If you let the ship steer itself, sooner or later, it's on the rocks.
And Mike, remember Russia? We're going to be friends with Russia. I mean, they're going to be training again with the Ukrainian. Mike, I'm telling you, Russia will never allow NATO to be in Ukraine. There's no way. It's like Russia being on the border in Mexico with missiles. It's not going to happen. I'm sorry, but it's not, because that's just a bridge too far when it comes to Russia. It's right over the border there.
It is. It is.
No? And he keeps saying we're friends. We're going to be buddies with him. We're not, like, where's that
sure
coming
went
from,
away.
though?
That sure went away. Well, for a while we were friends with Russia. We were all buddy. And the war hawks and the military-industrial complex were saying, the world's at peace. We're not making any money. We've got to get some wars going. Because when you're in the business of selling weapons of wars, you're also in the business of making sure those wars happen. It's called creating market demand, and that's what's going on here. The military-industrial complex, they're using all of their political influence and all of their money to basically stir up trouble all over the world so that they can make money from you for all these weapons that are going to blow up all over people who have actually done nothing wrong to us.
Well, I just had it with him, Mike. I mean, I'm going to get up the phone now, but you look at Saudi Arabia with Khashoggi and Benjamin Netanyahu, what they're doing to it's just over and over. If you don't show me results, then that's it. Have a good show, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. Getting on back to Israel and the upcoming elections. Apparently, rights groups are demanding that authorities provide thousands of Palestinian Bedouin citizens of Israel with access to polling stations. Apparently, there are 11 villages which are home to some 40,000 Palestinian Bedouins who have Israeli citizenship, and they're entitled to vote in the elections, but they have no polling stations or public transportation to reach existing stations. Now, of course, I'm sure that there are probably people in the Likud party who would be just as happy that more Palestinians don't vote in the election here. All right, let's take another phone call here. Joe in Tennessee, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I heard you and Dustin saying that Trump really hasn't done anything, and I have to disagree. I mean, I agree he hasn't done too much on the border wall, but he's tried, and he's not a dictator. He didn't. You're right about vaccine safety and voting legislation. I hope that comes, but the thing about the vaccine issue is it's a very difficult issue to bring up and not be painted as a kook. You know that? Kind of like if he talked about Sandy Hook or 9/11, I'm sure he'd be raked over the coals. And
yeah, but that's wearing out. I mean, right now the corporate media is screaming kook and tinfoil hat and conspiracy theorist at everybody to the point where it's lost its effect. And people are saying, the it's a trick. It's a trick to not have to deal with legitimate questions about vaccine safety and Sandy Hook and so forth and so on. Anyway, we're getting close to a commercial break. So you called in here to tell me something good that Donald Trump has actually accomplished that significantly impacts the lives of the American people.
Okay, well, let's say 2 Supreme Court justices, the end of NAFTA, no TPP.
Well, only one.
He's lowered regulations. Huh?
Only one Supreme Court judge.
Well, yes, he did Neil Gorsuch and he did
okay.
Kavanaugh.
I stand corrected on that one.
And he's probably going to get Ruth Bader Ginsburg and probably Clarence Thomas, because Clarence Thomas will probably resign before Trump's election just to make sure he gets a conservative in there.
I've been hearing that.
He's also not going along with the Paris climate change. He fought all those global warming lunatics who probably would have done a lot more. He's got peace going on with North Korea. I mean, seemed like we were headed to a war with them. There were rockets going off all the time. He's done a great job clearing out the FBI and the DOJ. I mean, he hasn't gotten all of them, but if you look at the list of the people that he's gotten rid of in the Department of Justice and the FBI, it's quite formidable. I could go through them, but there's probably about 25 people from Sally Yates to James Comey and a lot of other people. That's a few things off the top of my head. I could write a list. I mean, he's lowered regulation.
Yeah, well, the lowering the regulation benefited the business community, not the ordinary American people. And Americans right now are finding out that big GOP tax cut last year is not helping their taxes this year. Anyway, listen.
Well, there's a lot more jobs.
Joe, got to let you go. Got to take a break
down.
for commercials.
Okay.
Got to let you go. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and we're going to go right back to the phones to Joe in California. Aloha, Joe. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Before I get to my question on the border, during the holiday season, we were told that a lot of the crazy left, they were calling for the banning of that song, "Baby, It's Cold Outside."
Yes, I remember that.
Recall that? Okay. You know what?
I was singing that one myself two nights ago here in Hawaii.
Yeah, it's a great song. Oh, yes. You're seeing got a cold snap there.
Yes.
I'm sure a lot of these crazy left, I don't know how far back they want to go, but Al Jolson fans better be careful not to play any of that Swami singing.
Yeah, I know. I found that video
song.
and put it up on my page, and I captioned it. So now Al Jolson,
Al Jolson better be. I don't know if anything is. Yeah, I don't know if there are any monuments in this country named after Al Jolson. If they are, who knows?
Got to tear those things down.
They might be in for a name change. Mike, I know Joe in Tennessee means well, but he's got to be kidding himself. I mean, Joe, the only issue that matters is the border. It's border security that has to be addressed. I mean, he's talking about the Paris Climate Accord. Trump didn't sign it. Joe, big deal. It's about you got thousands of people coming in, changing the demographics of this country. These are future Democratic voters. Once they get these voters in, and Mike, you referenced 5 million on their way from Central America.
Yeah, that's according to Gallup.
Venezuela,
that's according to Gallup.
We have a war in Venezuela. Yeah, if there's a war in Venezuela, either over invasion or a civil war, millions more are going to be flooding in. And of course, the Central Americans will just, they'll take advantage of it, throw away their ID, and say, "Yeah, I'm from Venezuela too. I'm seeking asylum." So this is all Trump. I look at Trump as just like a holding action, because the way these migrants, these illegals are flowing in, there's not going to be another populist. I don't even want to call him a Republican. He's not governing as a populist. He campaigned as one, but you're not going to have another populist president like Trump, or one who campaigned like Trump with his rhetoric again in the future. You're just going to have these crazy left-wing liberals. Even the quote-unquote Republican Party is going to be the same. They're all on board. They support these illegals as well, because their corporate paymasters want the cheap labor. So, Joe, you're fooling yourself. The only issue that matters is the border, because as Ann Coulter said, if you don't secure that border, it's adios America.
You're absolutely right here. But I would argue that, and yes, Joe in Tennessee had his little list of, regulations got changed and all these other little things. But the major issues that Trump campaigned on were, getting us out of these foreign entanglements, getting that border secured. And neither one seems to be getting done. And the other issues that he brought up, of course, again, vaccine safety and overhauling the election system. And he just shut down his own election commission. He just dropped the ball on that. And that was an important one. That affects the entire country.
Absolutely. But even the issue, and I don't want to pick on Joe, he's a good guy, but it just seems like he's too much of a cultist when it comes to Trump. Even the Supreme Court, I don't care if Trump appoints 9 Supreme Court judges. Call me a cynic. I just think these Supreme Court judges, when it comes down to it, are controlled. And if they're told to make a decision in the deep state's favor, they will. So I don't care about the Supreme Court. I really don't care. The big issue for me is
we saw that with Obamacare. We saw that with Obamacare because
with Chief Justice Roberts.
Yeah.
So the border. There's a lot of good, hardworking Americans in this country, but many of them are getting old. They're dying off, and I don't want to see them replaced with these bums from I don't care what part of the world who are just coming here to live off of my tax dollars. I don't even want to say the government. I'm the one. People like me, people like you who work hard and pay taxes. I don't want to see these bums come into this country and live off of my sweat, my toil, and then have this country become a permanent one-party state. That's what it's all about. It's not about Paris Climate Accord and the Supreme Court.
Yeah, I hear you. I absolutely hear you. And the problem here is that this is a fight between nationalism and globalism, and that's really what is powering this whole debate over the border wall. And yes, it's true, the Democrats are looking forward to all these Democratic voters coming on in, and they used them very effectively out in California in the midterms. They got them sent into these districts that were just slightly red, enough to turn them blue, and that's why they lost so many House seats in California. But it is. The issue I have for illegal immigration, first of all, again, I'm okay with legal immigration. We have a process, come on through with it, and welcome. The issue with illegal immigrants coming on in and then just voting themselves our country is that this is our country. And this nation, as it is, all of its architecture, all of its infrastructure, all that is here, all that it makes it the physical United States of America, was built generation after generation by we, the American people. And we should have the right to leave it as our, heritage to coming generations, and not have the coming generations, displaced by a flood of immigrants who really don't have a strong emotional connection to this land and aren't really going to care for it. In fact, if you go into any place where there's a lot of illegal immigrants, they tend to trash the place. Look at Los Angeles. They've got trash all over the place there. The rat population is booming, and now they got a typhus epidemic.
I was just going to say the same thing. Someone I was listening to on YouTube said that they were recently in Southern California, and they said it looks worse than Venezuela. So before going into Venezuela, maybe we should send some soldiers into Southern California and take care of that mess.
Well, I absolutely agree with you on that one. But again, I think if Trump does not get his wall, and I don't mean 55 miles of it, that's nothing. There's 2,000 miles of border there. What do you think a 55-mile section of wall is going to do?
Nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing. Going to do nothing.
So if Trump doesn't get his wall,
California.
He's done. He's a one-term president.
Look what's happened to California. It used to be a Republican state. Now, forget it.
Yeah.
I wish it would just secede from the Union. I wish it would just secede so those 55 electoral votes wouldn't go for a Democrat.
Yeah. Well, there's talk about secession, and it's practically becoming part of Mexico again.
Yeah. All right, Mike. Thank you so much. Thanks for all you're doing.
Thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. And getting on back here. Okay, somebody did a poll regarding this Senate Bill 1, which would allow states to withhold government funding from any entities unwilling to certify they will not boycott Israel. But somebody went on out and did a poll, an IR-MEP poll through Google, and found 3/4 of Americans oppose outlawing boycotts of Israel. And so there's no public support for this. And I think probably a big part of it is Americans are getting angry that our elected representatives are working so hard in the service of a foreign government, even to the point of attacking our most basic right of freedom of speech, and that's got to be angering a lot of people. All right, we still have another caller on the line. Jim in Chicago, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. Real quick, there are two disturbing things about this bill, and if Trump signs it, he's a fool. Not only will he be getting less money for the wall, the Democrats at the last minute, they said they want less housing for these illegals, which means if they get a citation to go to court or whatever, they can just travel anywhere in America. So where in the hell are we going to house these people?
That's the whole point. If there's no place to house them, then they are released into the general population. They go on out to California, get a driver's license, and are registered to vote, yada, 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 yada. The Democrats are desperate to keep the process going. And, it's a multidimensional problem here. First of all, the Democrats are desperate to deny Trump any kind of a significant victory for his agenda. That's a big reason for blocking the wall. The Democrats have admitted they are dependent on illegal immigrant voters to hang on to power. And in the larger context, of course, this is part of this New World Order open borders idea that we're going to take all of the populations of the world and just blend them all together, and they'll stand around and hug each other and sing Kumbaya. And as we've seen in Europe and here in the United States of America, it's just not working out.
Well, not only that, though, if Trump signs this wall, you can forget about being a two-term president. And not only that, he will get so much flack from people like you, me, and other people. So I don't understand where he's coming from, but my biggest concern, if these people come here, where in the hell are they going to go?
Well, they're going to go someplace. I wonder how, they're getting free stuff from our government. The U.S. government is treating the illegal immigrants better than it treats our homeless veterans. That's something to think about.
Not only that, they attend the public schools, and they're able to get hospital care or medical care.
Yeah.
So, well, Michael, I'm going to let you go. Take care.
Thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. The phone lines are open again. It is an insane situation, and I have to wonder at the mindset of Democrats who are just totally oblivious to the damage their policies are causing to ordinary Americans. Nancy Pelosi, she's from San Francisco. I know she doesn't use public transportation, but she's got to be looking out the window of her car and see, all the hypodermic needles and all the trash and all the homeless. Anyway, New Yorker magazine came out with an article on so-called private Mossads for hire. And apparently these groups are known as Psy Group, Black Cube, and others. They specialize on generating fake online identities, which are now being called avatars. And some of these groups work with the neocon group Foundation for Defense of Democracies, which is a misnomer because it's a pure pro-Israel organization. And their goal, using these avatars, is to destabilize and disrupt anti-Israel movements from within by infiltrating them in social media and so forth. So, anyway, the internet, unfortunately, has become another battlefield. Okay. Now, here's an interesting article. This came out of Consortium News, and it was written by a Jewish author who says there's a bit of a problem. And this author was responding to Michelle Alexander's New York Times column, Time to Break the Silence on Palestine, which really got all the pro-Israel people, very, very upset. But this author was inspired and basically said it's time to address the issue of what we call PEP, which is progressive except Palestine. And he says there's a lot of people walking around saying that they're progressive and they want human rights and everything, but they have these blinders on always toward Palestine. And it's time for that to change. If you're going to be a progressive, be a progressive. Don't ignore what's going on in Palestine and then try and proclaim to the world about your progressive values. It just doesn't work on out. Okay. Mike Pompeo is out there saying that the U.S. will be more engaged in Eastern Europe. Ooh, huzzah, huzzah. And warns Russia of trying to divide the West. He's in the middle of a 5-country European tour that will focus on opposition to the growing influence of Russia and China in Central Europe. And he met with Hungary's right-wing populist Prime Minister Viktor Orban and basically said, we must not let Putin drive wedges between friends in NATO. Here is where Pompeo is knocking on the wrong door. Russia and China's influence is growing in Europe because of their economies, not their military. So Mike Pompeo's basically over in Europe telling them, well, our economy isn't as good, but you have to continue to do business with us or bad things will happen. That's really what his message is all about. Meanwhile, Viktor Orban came on back denouncing the hypocrisy of U.S. warnings on the dangers of dealing with Russia and China. And it appears that, pardon me, Budapest is fed up with lectures about its foreign policy. And that too is spreading. I mean, look at all the pressure they're bringing to bear on Germany to back out of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. And Germany said, no, we need it. It's important for us. So Pompeo is basically waving the war hammer to solve the fact that the U.S. economy is no longer competitive because our manufacturing has been in decline for 30 years. People don't want our GMO agriculture. Our schools are not teaching skills that would fit in the global marketplace. Our kids are getting indoctrinated. They're learning about transgenders instead of transmissions. Now, people are still reacting to Britain's Defense Secretary Gavin Williamson, who basically in a recent speech just flat out said, you know, we have to be ready for military action against Russia and China. And a lot of people are saying, this is nuts. You know, he's talking video game thinking, but a real war with Russia and China would be an exceedingly bad idea. The real worrying thing is that his statements received applause. So all of our so-called leaders, they're on board. We're going to have a new world war. It's going to be global. It's going to be really bad. Make your preparations now. Apparently, the United States has announced they're going to have joint U.S.-Ukraine military exercises taking place in the Black Sea, dubbed Operation Sea Breeze 2019. It's being described as a multinational maritime exercise, which means other nations will probably send in ships. Russia is saying this is a really bad idea. It's a dangerous idea. That's the way we will view it. This is coming from Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Grigory Karasin. So again, the U.S. and NATO, they just keep pushing until at some point Russia's going to push back. We'll be right back. And aloha America, welcome back to our show here. And as part of the Russia bad, you know, we've got to arm up against them, and you know, more money from you for the military-industrial complex. Apparently, the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency has come out with a new assessment entitled Challenges to Securities in Space, in which it makes the claim that Russia likely is pursuing laser weapons to disrupt, degrade, or damage satellites and their sensors. And The report added Russia began delivering a laser weapon system to the aerospace forces that is likely intended for an anti-satellite mission. Moreover, the document also claims Russia is developing enhanced on-orbit dual-use technology that can be used to attack and permanently disable satellites. Well, the United States has been developing exactly the same thing all this time. Now, I don't know about all this talk about lasers. Certainly nothing on the ground can take out a satellite in space. My apologies to Tom Clancy because of thermal blooming issues. But the United States, I mean, even going all the way back to Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative, they were talking about these things. Smart rocks, lasers, and finding ways to damage satellites. And again, I want to reiterate that it is very, very short-sighted and foolhardy to have war in orbit, because you're going to turn it into a junkyard in which nothing is going to survive, including all the satellites that we use for communication, navigation, Earth monitoring, science, all of that stuff. It's all going to get smashed up from all the flying shrapnel. So, all right, we're still hearing repercussions of Donald Trump's pulling out of the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. And going on back to March 1st of last year with Putin's State of the Union address, he basically unveiled a whole bunch of new weapons which are clearly designed to evade current U.S. defensive systems. And Putin explained why they had done it, why they were building these new weapons, because in 2002, the U.S. pulled out of the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty. And at the time, the Russians declared they would be forced to respond and were basically told, do whatever you want. And so they did, developing new weapons that no anti-ballistic missile system can ever hope to stop. They've already got one of them on combat duty, the Kinzhal, one that's about to go into mass production, the Avangard, and several currently being tested. And here's how they break down. The Kinzhal is a hypersonic air-launched cruise missile that flies at Mach 10, 10 times the speed of sound. That's 7,700 miles per hour, and can destroy both ground installations and ships. There is nothing in the current U.S. arsenal that could intercept it. All right, we got to take a break for station identification. More about this when we come back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're talking about the latest Russian weapons, which are game changers. And as I've commented many times before, the military-industrial complex has been refining and updating the weapons with which World War II was fought. And Russia, and for that matter, China, have gone way outside the box. So we're talking about Russia's new weapons. Now, the Avangard, this is just now going into mass production. This is a maneuverable, hypersonic payload delivery system for intercontinental ballistic missiles that flies at better than Mach 20. That's 15,000 miles an hour. That means it could basically cross the United States in about a quarter of an hour. I don't have my calculator out. I may be a little off, but, you know, Mach 20 is coming up on orbital speed. It has a 740-mile range and can carry a nuclear weapon up to 300 kilotons. Now, what it is, this Avangard is launched on top of an ICBM. So that 740-mile range is from wherever the ICBM releases it. That is nasty. Okay, Poseidon is currently in testing. This is an autonomous nuclear-powered torpedo with unlimited range that can travel at a 3,000-foot depth, maintaining a little over 100 knots. That is a lot of power. And I got to tell you, I'm not sure I would go with that 100 knots, but there are speed advances being made all the time. So I'm presuming that the nuclear power is from a radioisotope thermoelectric generator. And of course, with the cold ocean water on the outside, the thermocouples are going to work much better. So it may in fact have the amount of electricity it needs to travel at 100 knots here. Let's see. Burevestnik, also in testing. This is a nuclear-powered cruise missile that flies at around 270 miles per hour and can stay in the air for 24 hours, giving it a 6,000-mile range. I would be very interested in seeing how they use nuclear power to power a cruise missile. And again, I'm going to take a wild guess here that they're sucking air in and sucking it through or past an array of decaying radioisotopes. And they are sufficient to heat the air up to provide thrust. So that raises the question of what kind of radioisotopes is Russia using that would generate that kind of heat from decay? Because I don't think they've got a miniaturized fission reactor. I mean, the complexity and maintenance on that, it has to be RTG. Okay, Peresvet is a mobile laser complex that can blind drones and satellites, knocking out space and aerial reconnaissance systems. Okay, again, you know, knocking out a satellite with a laser is very problematic because of thermal blooming. You've got that atmosphere. I mean, we've all gone outside on a summer night and looked up at the stars and we see them twinkling. That is your problem, because a laser beam fired from the ground is going to be traveling up through all that air and it's going to get distorted and spread apart. And I know there have been some big breakthroughs in adaptive optics for astronomers that would have applications for refocusing a laser beam, but those usually require mirrors that are rather large and difficult to move around. But if Russia has solved that problem, then yeah, that's a new game in town here. Okay, the last one. This one is not yet in testing. It's still in development. The SARMAT. This is the new heavy intercontinental ballistic missile that can fly arbitrary suborbital courses, such as over the South Pole, and strike arbitrary points anywhere on the planet. Because it does not follow a predictable ballistic trajectory, it is impossible to intercept. And I wonder if this is eventually going to be the launch vehicle for the Avangard. Over in Spain, major protests, something like 45,000 people, and they're protesting Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez's plan to try and ease tensions with the Catalan separatists. And the protesters accusing Sanchez of stabbing Spain in the back. They're calling for snap elections because of his government's decision to accept a long-held demand of Catalan secessionists to appoint a facilitator in talks between pro-independence and pro-unity political parties. Well, I've got to side with President Sanchez on this one. What's wrong with having a facilitator to see, you know, if we can get things to calm down here? Okay. Okay, Mike, that would depend on the optics. And it depends on the laser source. Okay, we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network here. Okay, over in France, there is all of a sudden, there's been a spate of anti-Semitism. Apparently, a bagel shop had the word Juden sprayed on its front window. A memorial in honor of a Jewish man was vandalized, and it's just all over the place. And interestingly enough, the headline gives away what's going on. This is from Associated Press. Anti-Semitic acts hit France amid anti-government protests. So do you see the agenda there? This is an attempt to link the yellow vests with anti-Semitism, which would suggest that all of these anti-Semitic acts are in fact hate crime hoaxes, which we know is a major problem. Even here in the United States of America, a lot of hate crimes are hate crime hoaxes. In fact, we've got one we're reporting on a little bit further down here. Okay, so what's really going on here? Why are so many people in the streets right now? In France, the main complaint that the Yellow Vest movement has taken is crystal clear. People can't pay their bills anymore. In Great Britain, austerity has demolished wages and social care, the National Health Service, and much else. In the United States, many millions of Americans can't afford a $400 emergency payment, have even scarcer access to health care, and live from paycheck to paycheck. And this is basically true of every Western nation. They all tell the same tale. Now, back in France, Macron is trying to explain there's not enough liberal Europe in our lives. And the Yellow Vests are coming back and saying, no, there's too much. We need less liberalism. Todd Lindbergh is out saying that Donald Trump is serious about diplomacy with North Korea, which would be good. In the end, it's good grandstanding, but Trump needs to start actually doing something. The impasse at this point is that North Korea has made several gestures, and now they're waiting for Trump to reciprocate. And he's not doing it. The message going from North Korea to Washington, D.C. is when you meet our needs, and the sanctions, and the war formally, we'll denuclearize. And the message going from Washington to Korea is, no, you denuclearize first, and then we'll talk. And that really is the impasse. And Trump might think about taking some kind of action, making some kind of gesture to let North Korea know he's serious. Now, Stanford University has come on out with a study claiming that North Korea may have more nukes, but the threat is actually reduced. And what they're basically saying is they're estimating, mind you, they don't really know, but they're estimating that North Korea has continued to produce bomb fuel and has produced enough in the past year to add as many as 7 nuclear weapons to its arsenal. However, the country's freeze in nuclear and missile testing since 2017 means that the weapons program poses less of a threat than it did at the end of that year. This is from Stanford University's Center for International Security and Cooperation. Interestingly enough, the corporate media is reporting on the first part of that study, they're building more nukes, and didn't mention that second part about how the freeze in nuclear and missile testing means it's less of a problem. All North Korea wants is security. They're not going to attack anybody with nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons are used for deterrence, with the exceptions of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That's why countries want nuclear weapons. If Iran gets the nuclear weapon, they're not going to use it. They're just going to sit on it and say, leave us alone. That's the whole point of having nuclear weapons. The U.S. military, ramping up the anti-China propaganda, is now screaming there's a threat from a Chinese-run space station in Argentina. And by space station, they mean a radio telescope, a tracking station. And it's a deep space ground station in the deserts of Patagonia, which Patagonia is home to a lot of radio telescopes and optical telescopes. There's a lot of good astronomy going on down there. So Admiral Craig Fowler came on out and said he's concerned about China's accelerated expansion into Latin America because China supports Venezuela, Cuba, and Nicaragua. And here's the problem, though. Every nation with a space program has to maintain deep space tracking stations all over the world. The United States has one in Goldstone in California deserts, Madrid, Spain, and Canberra, Australia. That's how it works. China has to have the same thing. They have tracking stations in China. In fact, they're building the world's biggest radio telescope there right now. In fact, I think it's just about done. And probably they're going to have something over in Europe as well. It's not that big a deal because it's about tracking the satellites. But they're trying to say, this is a big problem. It's a threat. It's a threat. Everything's going to be touted as a threat. Next, we're going to hear there's a fortune cookie plot. There's a question here being asked by Mint Press News about Eric Prince, who was the founder of Blackwater Z, whatever they call themselves right now. And he's now become the chairman of Hong Kong-based Frontier Services Group. Is apparently involved in helping China build camps for these Uyghur Muslim minority in the Xinjiang province, which has drawn condemnation from U.S. newspapers to leaders of Muslim nations. There are some concerns about how they're being treated, why they're being treated, why they're being incarcerated. So, now here's a great article. It's over at TruthDig, and it's called The Con of American Patriotism. And it starts out with a reference to the book and later the Tom Cruise movie Born on the 4th of July, which was based on Ron Kovic's tour in Vietnam, in which he wound up being crippled and also inadvertently accidentally killed one of his fellow soldiers, which just tortured him for a long time. Since he's come on back from all that, he is an anti-war activist. And he's out there basically saying the problem is that people are not learning the lessons from Kovic's story, or in fact from any veteran who's come back from the war zones, missing bodily parts. For some reason, people tend to fall victim to all this appeal to patriotism. Oh, the patriotic thing to do is to let the government send you off to war. Well, I prefer the definition of patriotism where you're loyal to your country and its people at all times and to the government only when it deserves it. And when your government is engaged in fomenting wars for purely economic reasons and sending other people's children off to be killed and crippled in them, I don't consider that time to be patriotic. So, but apparently too many people see going in the military as proof of their prowess and their strength, and many of them fortunately make it back okay. A lot of them don't. Some of them don't come back entirely in the mental state here. All right, so let's get back to domestic politics. Ilhan Omar, of course, has ignited a firestorm by saying AIPAC influences Congress using money. Israel supporters erupt. Oh, it's anti-Semitism. It's a cruel stereotype. It's an old canard. We know that that's absolutely not true. And as I mentioned before, it's stunning how much time U.S. political leaders spend defending a foreign nation, even if it means attacking free speech rights of Americans. Now, shortly after Omar came on out with this, Adi Barkan, a Democratic progressive activist who is unfortunately, tragically dying of ALS, put up his thread at Twitter saying, yeah, he was a staffer on a long-shot Democratic congressional race in deep red Ohio, and yes, they got approached by AIPAC. And they were funded to the maximum allowable. And he's saying, yes, it is all about the Benjamins. So what we have here is the Democratic Party leadership, obviously in bed with AIPAC. They came on out and condemned Omar for anti-Semitic accusations. And, I mean, basically all the top Democratic leaders, you know, and of course they've just guaranteed more AIPAC money for their next election, their next campaign here. Nancy Pelosi apparently exerted a tremendous amount of pressure on Ilhan Omar to apologize. And Ilhan Omar has apologized for the comments, which the corporate media is trying to spin as Omar saying that AIPAC is not influencing Congress. Hang on a second. But that's not what Omar said. She said she was sorry that she hurt some people's feelings. But she's not retracting the accusation. And as I said before, we all know it's true. These scandals of AIPAC pouring money to reshape and meddle with our politics. Remember what they did to Cynthia McKinney? And it's all over the world. It's not just the United States. Now, Not too long ago, Sarah Lee Whitson, head of the Human Rights Watch's Middle East Division, was attacked by anti-Palestinian groups and pundits for basically saying there was a clear example of Israeli interference in British politics. And she was talking about the Act Ill organization, which is coordinated and backed by Israel's so-called Ministry of Strategic Affairs, had used a troll army to spread false information about Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of Great Britain's official opposition party. And Whitson commented, "Why is this Israel interference in domestic UK politics acceptable? Is it only a problem when Russia does this?" Well, apparently, yeah. It's a problem when anybody does it except Israel. Okay, Judicial Watch has come on out with more revelations, and apparently in the latest batch of documents, they have uncovered indications that Comey sent a letter to Congress regarding the FBI's discovery that the Wiener laptop contained Clinton's emails. Hillary Clinton's personal lawyer, David Kendall, within hours, emails Baker requesting a call about the Comey letter. And apparently what it came on down to, he said the letter was ambiguous and made statements that were inchoate and highly ominous. To get to the short version of it, he wanted to basically soften the blow of the FBI's report in order to basically protect the image and reputation of Secretary Clinton. So it is a deep state. They're all doing favors for each other. It's all buddy-buddy handshake deal here. Now, as you know, we're coming up on a vote for Trump's pick for Attorney General, William Barr, who is, first of all, he's been involved in a lot of really nasty stuff. He's a gun grabber. I hope he is not confirmed. Senator Rand Paul is saying he will vote against confirming Barr, and I've been seeing a bunch of other people being interviewed saying they will also vote against him as well. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And again, if you would like to help Republic Broadcasting, and they really need it, we're running on this really old equipment that it is in dire need of upgrades, is what it comes on down to. And we're just trying to keep all this running. We don't have corporate sponsors. We don't take money from George Soros. And anyway, the postal address where you can send a check, money order, or if you prefer anonymity cash, is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. The phone number where you can make a credit or debit card donation or pledge to be a recurring subscriber is 800-724-2719, extension 1 during business hours, extension 3 at all other times. Okay, so let's see. Apparently, there's this Antifa activist, Alejandro, just give me a second here. Okay. Apparently, the guy's name is Alkoff. He's an Antifa activist, and he's facing assault charges because this goes back to last November when this Antifa mob attacked two Marines, Alejandro Godinez and Luis Torres, both of whom were Hispanic. Alkoff and two others were charged in the attack. They're pleading not guilty. But apparently this guy was tied to Democratic policymakers. And of course, Democrats are trying to distance themselves from him. Anyway, all right, a little bit of good news for Donald Trump here. The U.S. Senate Intelligence Committee has found no, repeat, no, nada, zip, zero. They found no direct evidence of a conspiracy between the Trump campaign and Russia during the 2016 U.S. presidential election. And the bipartisan committee, which is nearing the end of the investigation, has found no proof that Trump formed any kind of a corrupt pact with Russia to offer sanctions relief or other favorable treatment in return for Russian help during the election. Now, this was being reported on NBC News that then proceeded to go on in and say, well, you know, but there were a lot of strange contacts between Trump's people and Russians, and so we're not really sure about this thing. Meanwhile, of course, there's a whole bunch of hard evidence of Democrats' collusion with Russia in the 2016 election. I mean, you had that Clinton-funded Steele dossier heavily relied on Russian sources. John Podesta sat on the board of an energy company with a Kremlin official and a Russian oligarch. Tangible evidence of Russian collusion exists. But we only investigate it when it's Republicans, never when it's Democrats. Democrats are like Israel, they're above the law here. Anyway, congressional investigators have painstakingly pieced together evidence that shows the Clinton Research Project had extensive contact with Russians. Anyway, meanwhile, on the other side, Representative Adam Schiff, who's chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, is vowing to continue to investigate Trump's finances and foreign connections for as long as it takes. Okay, isn't there something more pressing? If you're in charge of the House Intelligence Committee, like abuse of the American people by the National Security Agency, but he's basically taking the entire committee and he says, this is going to be our focus. Okay? So Hillary Clinton, a politician and a former Secretary of State, can sell the Russians our uranium, but Donald Trump, a businessman, cannot conduct business in a foreign country like any other American entrepreneur. And this is just another attack dog from the left. And they must be worried he could win in 2020. This is, again, the political hatchet jobs are continuing. Now, in the other direction, little bit of good news. Lindsey Graham is issuing subpoenas for anyone who signed or was involved in the FISA warrant on Carter Page. And at a minimum, that includes James Comey, Rod Rosenstein, and Sally Yates. So maybe we'll see something happen there. Devin Nunes is out there saying that there's a cadre of House Intelligence Committee Republicans are sifting through more than a dozen transcripts as they consider making criminal referrals for an investigation into alleged political bias in the FBI. And boy, wouldn't we all like to see that happen. And Nunes said we'll be continuing that task force, except that the House Intelligence Committee Republicans will be involved. Well, I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing here. Okay, this is a little bit weird. Have you seen popping up all over the place these trial balloons about Michelle Obama running in 2020 because of her star power, her celebrity? And apparently at the Grammy Awards, Alicia Keys brought a quartet of very famous women onto the stage: Lady Gaga, Jennifer Lopez, Jada Pinkett Smith, and Michelle Obama got the standing ovation. Yeah, and yes, she's got name value, but the presidency is not supposed to be about popularity. It's supposed to be about ability. And Michelle, she's not qualified. We'll be right back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, as you know, Kamala Harris is in the running for 2020. And when you become a candidate for president, of course, everything starts to catch up with you. And apparently, Kamala Harris, when she was California's Attorney General, her office made the case that some nonviolent offenders needed to stay incarcerated or else the prison system would lose a source of cheap labor. Now, in 2011, the Supreme Court ruled in Brown versus Plata that California's prisons were so overcrowded they violated the Constitution's prohibition of cruel and unusual punishment. 3 years later, the state was ordered to allow nonviolent second-time offenders who had served half their sentence to be eligible for parole. So here we have Kamala Harris in a state that supports private prisons, prison factories, keeping people in prison so that they could be used for labor. I think that's called slavery here. And a lot of people are still out there talking about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and her Green New Deal, which, when it first went on up at the website, guaranteed economic security even for those unwilling to work. And apparently, Robert Hockett, who's a top advisor, was out there on Tucker Carlson saying the exact opposite. So they're already struggling to try and recover from that one. It's a Looney Tunes document. It's unworkable, and people are distancing themselves from her. Okay, do you remember back when Alabama Chief Justice and Senate candidate Roy Moore was accused of abusing this lady named Moore as a 15-year-old? And she sued him for defamation. He is countersued. And the case of Korfman versus Moore has been pending for over a year. And yet, according to the Moore defense team, Leigh Korfman has yet to appear before a court reporter to give her testimony under oath. Now, Moore appeared for an entire day to give sworn testimony under extensive examination by Korfman's attorneys. However, she has succeeded in avoiding numerous motions to compel her testimony under oath. Sounds to me like that case is falling apart. Okay. Jeffrey Epstein is back in the news again. As you know, he was convicted back in 2008, huge sex scandal that caught in a lot of very prominent people in the world, including Bill Clinton, including a member of the royal family, just all kinds of people. And it started in Florida, which is where he got into trouble. And then after he got out of the trouble, he built himself his little private pleasure island down in the Caribbean. And a lot of people were saying, how is it that a guy who molested so many children got off with such a light sentence? Did it have something to do with his political connections? And so now there is apparently going to be a Department of Justice investigation into just how it is that Epstein got this sweetheart deal. What exactly rented lips exactly happened here? Alrighty, getting on into this thing about blackface. As you know, they're just pushing it all over the place, and it really is ridiculous. Apparently, somebody did a poll and found that more than a third of Americans believe it's sometimes acceptable for white people to wear blackface. Now, the opinions varied along racial, political, and generational lines, but it's not an absolute, we're going to be horrified by this, especially when it comes to things like Halloween or Al Jolson. Anyway, as you know, Democrat Amy Klobuchar has declared her candidacy. She's campaigning on opposition to human-caused global warming. Unfortunately, she announced in the middle of a blizzard, which Donald Trump basically couldn't resist poking fun at. And apparently, The View co-host Joy Behar and Meghan McCain basically clashed awkwardly over this presidential bid. And Behar has even accused McCain of throwing a hissy fit. So I'm not sure why people even watch that show anymore. I get emails from people who watch the show and say, "Gosh darn, these people, they're liberal maniacs." And I say, "Well, change the dial here." Okay, we were talking before about hate crime hoaxes. We may have another one on our hands. Apparently, some 2 weeks ago, Empire star Jussie Smollett claimed he was the victim of a racist, homophobic attack. Now, police have found no leads, no suspects, and a lot of people living near him are growing skeptical. And apparently one of his neighbors, Agan Muhammad, said, "I don't believe it happened the way he said it did. I've been in this neighborhood for 5 years. I don't believe it, not around here. Half the people are gay, the other half are black." Cops have said they've gone through all the surveillance video where the attack supposedly happened, but they can't find the incident. Meanwhile, Chicago police said that Smollett has yet to turn over data from his cell phone to verify his claim that he was on the phone with his music manager, Brandon Moore, when he was allegedly attacked. Now, as of the last commercial break and looking at Fox News, Smollett has turned over some of the cell phone data, but the Chicago police are saying it's been redacted and it's basically unusable. So it is starting to look like yet another in a long series of hate crime hoaxes. Alrighty, over at Bloomingdale's, they had launched a line of t-shirts which have been declared offensive. The T-shirt was emblazoned with the words "fake news" on the front, and apparently some journalists came on in and they got triggered. Oh my goodness, how horrible! It's denigrating to us, hardworking corporate media prostitutes and correspondents. And so Bloomingdale's has taken the shirt down and apologized. We're sorry, we hurt your feeling. Do you remember Outland? Was a follow-on to Bloom County comic strip, and they had this one ongoing series where these lawyers were just out there saying you can't say this, you can't say it. And it basically wound up in a world where everybody was walking around with like this cage over their head, so they couldn't touch others, they couldn't be touched, and there was nothing else around. They were living basically in a void. That's where we're heading here. There's no room for people to be expressive and creative anymore. Personally, I thought the T-shirt was a cool idea. Okay, another article, this one coming out of Zero Hedge, observing the fact that over the last couple of months, the corporate media has sort of declined on all the references to Weimar, Germany, Hitler, the brink of fascism that America has supposedly been teetering on since Hillary Clinton lost the election. And this article is saying maybe Trump is surrendering to the deep state and they've decided to go soft on him. I don't think so. I think it's the public reaction to all of these illusions between the President of the United States and the Nazis. First of all, after a while, we just get sick and tired of hearing it. It's wearing. It really is. Okay, we have a caller on the line. David in San Francisco. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. Hey, this being Lincoln's birthday, I happen to be thinking, I've been thinking for the last couple of months that the currency speculators are involved with some of the foreign policy. And you might have a little knowledge of this. Seems to me I remember you knew, about like the panics of 100 years ago and how the Federal Reserve was picking up the same technique as the old bankers back in the days of panics, where you would have a certain percentage of, like the currency was usually 10 times as much gold as was in Fort Knox, right? So the nation could produce 10 times what was in Fort Knox for the amount of currency, right? So there was a technique they used to do where they would reduce the amount of currency at a time when there were a whole lot of loans outstanding. So they would intentionally call the loans when there wasn't enough currency in circulation, and they would force people to go bankrupt. You remember that technique?
Yeah, I remember that. And one of the things that happened during the great crash of 1929 was that there was no short-term credit available to try and stop the market plunge.
Right, yeah, and that was their scam, and they would end up owning huge amounts of American farmland or, industry or whatever. And so it was seen as these guys would repeat the same technique over and over and over. The panics of 1860, 1870, 1880, and was it William Jennings Bryan gave his famous speech, "I will not be nailed to a cross of gold with nails of silver," if I remember right.
Yeah, that's...
And that pretty close to right?
I recall hearing something similar to that, yes.
Yeah, it's called his Cross of Gold speech. And a lot of people don't realize it, but William Jennings Bryan ran for vice president, I think, in 1876, and that's when he gave that famous speech. And he was seen. He was an early, was a progressive. He was a populist, if I remember right. And that whole populist party came out of the cattle country, farm country, where the Chicago Board of Trade used to trick them into, the commodity price projections in the spring never matched up to when it came time to pay cash for the grain. So, the currency speculators and the grain speculators would always con the farmers and ranchers into selling low and, buying high and selling low.
Yes.
And so that whole technique, it reminded me, today's Lincoln's birthday, and Lincoln apparently came up with, I think the greenback dollar was an attempt to face off against these bankers who were trying to demand that we only use gold. And Lincoln said, screw that, we're going to use silver too.
Yes.
Fort Knox is going to also include silver. And, so, yeah, it seems like a good topic for Lincoln's birthday.
Yeah, it does. And, of course, we don't call it Lincoln's birthday anymore. It's called President's Day. And that's the day when the president comes out of his burrow, and if he sees his shadow, we get more taxes.
I suppose. Yeah, there's a lot of story. In fact, you're familiar with the concept of hyperinflation.
Oh, yes.
Where they overproduce the bills. So instead of a 10-to-1 ratio, they might have a 1,000,000-to-1 ratio. And
yeah.
I've got my grandfather's old stamp collection, and I've actually got a postage stamp in there. It's 2 billion Deutschmarks, for a postage stamp.
Yes.
2 billion of them. And so the whole idea that people were tricked into believing that some fat cat at the top could tell you how much a sandwich was worth, they were forcing people to use paper that was being manipulated by the hour, and
yes.
It was just this fraud that if we were going to free slaves, well, let's free people from using funny money.
Well, absolutely. I mean, it is a new form of enslavement. That's what private central banking does, and it's basically it's a scam. It's 300 years old, and we just grow up being used to it and being told this is the way things are. And I remember in grade school being shown a film strip, about how the Federal Reserve, was on our side, and this was the way our money system was supposed to work. But it very clearly does not, and we can see that just looking around ourselves at what's happening to the American people and our country right now. All the wealth is just funneling up to the top.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I saw a post just today. Some new report says that the super rich in America have, I think it's 3 zeros, 0.00025. That percentage of the American population owns more money than the bottom 40%.
Yes.
I mean, it's an incredible number, and it's this idea that it's like the TV show about hoarders. Well, they're money hoarders. People that are just hoarding money and not putting it in circulation. Nobody can use it. These guys just hold on to it and play with it like a Monopoly board game. And
for the most part, they're taking that money and they're buying hard assets, hard tangible assets, like you said, the grain fields and so forth and so on. And I prefer the term money junkies. But right now in this country, the wealth inequality is as dangerously out of whack as it was during the Gilded Age, during the Roaring '20s, just before the big crash happened.
Yeah, actually, the Gilded Age, wasn't that the 1890s or so?
Yeah, I misspoke. It's the Roaring '20s I was thinking about. But there was a lot of wealth inequality in the Gilded Age as well.
Yeah, well, it's hyperinflation again, if I remember right, before World War I, which is pretty much the era we're talking about, each country had their own exchange rate.
Yes.
If you were going to travel around the world, the diplomatic relationship between each country set what the currency was going to be. And so it was always between each country. And when the World War I got started, when, this dumb Archduke got shot, and he was such a jackass that nobody liked him. He was useless for diplomacy. He was actually kind of a, horse's ass, a bad drunk, a gambler. He had a horrible reputation, yet World War I was founded around him, and it didn't make any sense.
Well, that was the excuse to launch it. That people wanted the war, they needed an excuse. Something that their population would get behind. I mean, Archduke Ferdinand may have been, politically a dummy, but his population had been convinced to love him. And so his assassination did motivate them to go to war.
Well, apparently the currency speculators took advantage of the situation, and they praised a country for a while, and then a couple of weeks later they would curse the same country. So they'd praise a country, curse a country, just in order to bounce the exchange rates. And by doing that, they ended up.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'll tell you what. We got to take a break for commercials. Stay on the line. I am going to come back to you after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're still talking with David in San Francisco. We're talking about how those with a great deal of money will, if you want, weaponize it against the general public, and it's always been that way. Going on back, to the establishment of usury, it's always about using the money to get more money, and sometimes it's done with very nefarious means. And again, we saw a lot of that in 1929, and we're seeing a lot of it today. And if you look at Wall Street today, it's almost like hardly a day goes by that one of these so-called reliable, trustworthy, responsible institutions of finance is caught in some kind of a shady deal, and nobody goes to prison. I mean, what a racket! What an absolute racket!
It has to do with reputations, right?
Yes.
Like the theory of money is that if you've got a good reputation, you'll make a bunch of money, and if all of a sudden somebody steals your money, does that mean that they have stolen your reputation? Do you lose your reputation once you lose the numbers that are reflected by what you built? And so the concept of money has its real flaw to it in that it's supposed to be a reputation, but in actuality it's not. And that it's bad enough that a nation's money system can be bounced on in the newspapers. A bunch of con artists write a bunch of terrible stories about your country and ruin the currency rate, and then they praise it a few weeks later. And look at Venezuela right now. Aren't they like getting into the hundreds of, the currency exchange rate has gotten to be, I remember when Mexico, it used to be 8 cents per peso.
Yes.
And I think was at 16.5 it was to the dollar. And there was a point, and I'm thinking it was at the end of Jimmy Carter, when it was 30,000 pesos to the dollar. And I mean, you could have a raise. You're working in Mexico and they raise your salary by 20-fold. That still wasn't enough to deal with a 30,000, increase. And so it was amazing to imagine that people aren't keeping up with the numbers, and then the whole nation's currency gets bounced.
Yes.
And it's as if the reputation of everybody in that nation gets reduced by how much they bounce it. And so they praise it and they curse it. They praise it and they curse it. And they just, the currency speculators just basically are cashing in on the bouncing.
Yeah,
and all of the commodities in the world.
It's induced. I mean, that's why we have this ongoing cycle of inflation, deflation in this country, because it's like a giant heartbeat that is pumping the real assets, tangible wealth of the American people out of their hands and into the hands of the money junkies. It's rigged. Anyway, listen, David, got to let you go.
Hey, good week. Yeah.
All right, we're going to let you go. We're going to do station identification. We have another caller waiting on the line, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're going to go back to the phones to Bill in Wisconsin. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say aloha, because we are in the process here of getting 15 inches of global warming.
Oh,
it's
my goodness.
Coming down like crazy. Trucks are going off the road. It's a real bad situation. So I wish I was in Hawaii, but I'm not. The other thing I would like to say is kudos to Representative Omar. Okay, I hope she sticks to her guns. It'll be a difficult time for her.
Yes.
But we need more of that. And if it's got to come from a left-wing Democratic congresswoman, so be it. The other thing.
Well, hang on a second before you go any further. Before you go any further, the latest word is President Trump is demanding she resign.
He's a fraud. He's a fraud. If you had to, I watched his entire State of the Union. I'd like to know who wrote that for him. Sheldon Adelstein. Okay. I'm getting a little sick of Donald Trump, putting somebody like Elliot Abrams in on this situation in Venezuela. Come on. He's a fraud. So, there are a few things that he's done that I think are good, but I think he's deceiving a lot of the American people, and that needs to stop. So the other thing that I'd like to mention is PBS has that program called Finding Your Roots.
Yes.
And tonight's program is going to go into the roots of Paul Ryan and Tulsi Gabbard.
Okay.
Now, there's somebody else, I forget who the third one is, but that ought to be an interesting show that people ought to take a look at. If it's true, it'd be interesting to see what their background is. That's all I got.
All right. Well, thanks an awful lot, and we're going to let you go here. By the way, President's Day is actually the 18th, for those who are confused by that. Also, one of our listeners sent in that Cross of Gold speech, and it's been posted to the front page of whatreallyhappened.com for those of you who want to learn more about that. Getting on back to the economic news, the stock market's had a really good day today, and apparently it was being buoyed up by the possibility of a U.S. government budget deal, potential progress with the China trade, and but again, it underscores a basic failing of our stock market. It's not being driven by the value of the stocks. It's being driven by sentiment, by superstition. Another article, this one coming out from Investment Research Dynamics, saying, as the Fed reflates the stock bubble, the economy crumbles. And what they're basically talking about is, first of all, it starts out saying about all these billionaires like Kyle Bass who appear on financial television to look the viewer in the eye and tell them the economy is booming, there's not going to be a recession until the mid-2020, and it's going to be, mild. And explain that to the 78% plus households who are living paycheck to paycheck. And what they're talking about is the fact that the Federal Reserve has gotten themselves into a bit of a corner. Because when they try and raise rates, the economy stutters. It's that fragile. And every time that the stock market heads south, they print up more money and they go on in and they use marketing forces to drive the market back up again. But they're not going to be able to keep that up forever. I think we're seeing a trend of smaller investors already pulling out of the stock market, and what's in there right now are the big institutional computerized investors. So more and more, the stock market is really disconnecting from ordinary life here in the United States of America. Okay, another story, this one coming on out from Seeking Alpha. Central bank gold demand spikes to highest level in nearly 50 years. And apparently this all began back in 2008 during that financial crisis. Prior to that, banks really considered gold just wasn't all that relevant. We've got all these debt instruments and all this other stuff. And starting in 2009, there was a change in sentiment. And central banks shifted from being net sellers to net buyers for the first time in 20 years. Now, over in Italy, as you know, their government is making noises about getting rid of their central bank and taking control of the gold reserves. And they've come on out and said explicitly, Italy's gold belongs to the Italian people, not the central bank. And it has led people over at the Investment Watch blog to wonder if Italy is getting ready for a collapse. All right, we're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network here. Okay, a little bit of other news that tells us things are not as rosy as corporate media would have you believe. U.S. consumer credit tops 17 trillion with a T dollars. They're almost catching up to the government, which is at 22 trillion with a T dollars. And folks, whatever you can do to get out of debt, now's the time to do it. Because when the big kaboinga happens, you know, they're going to be coming in, they're going to be seizing houses, they're going to be seizing cars, they're going to be just grabbing assets like crazy, because that's what they do when the currency falls, as that caller was telling us here. Right now, in another red flag for the economy, a record 7 million Americans are 3 months behind on their car payment or more. This is coming out of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. And this is even more than during the wake of the financial crisis era back in 2009, 2010. Things have actually gotten worse. And I love the way this article is written. It goes on to say, despite the strong economy, many Americans continue to struggle to pay their bills. And people who are 3 months or more behind on their car payments often lose their vehicle, making it even more difficult to get to work. So economists at the New York Fed finished it up by saying, the substantial and growing number of distressed borrowers suggests that not all Americans have benefited from the strong labor market, which to me says there really isn't a strong labor market. It's not there. It's more propaganda. They're concealing the true scale of unemployment, just like they're hiding the true rate of inflation and the true GDP. We have become more soaked in government lies than the former Soviet Union was, and they were masters at it. Anyway, as I mentioned to that caller, 1920s style wealth inequality is back in style. I mean, nobody's wearing flapper dresses and doing the Charleston. But in 1929, before the Wall Street crash unleashed the Great Depression, the top 0.1% richest adult share of total household wealth was close to 25%. And now, of course, the inequality is even worse. So we know what's coming here. Apparently, the market is convinced a Jaguar car, not the cat, bankruptcy is only a matter of time. And this is taking some of the heat off of Tesla and whether it will be profitable and whether or not its model is even viable for the foreseeable future. But apparently, there's a lot of doubt on Jaguar Land Rover Automotive PLC. And again, people just don't have the money. And interestingly enough, Elon Musk even admitted that on the fourth quarter earnings conference call. The demand for the Model 3 is insanely high. The inhibitor is affordability. It's just like people literally don't have the money to buy the car. It's got nothing to do with desire. They just don't have enough money in their bank account. Well, yeah, that exactly is the problem. So, over in the February 3rd issue of the Short Sellers Journal, Tesla's failed business model. And they're commenting about that Tesla Elon Musk quote. And he says it seems odd that he doesn't seem to get the relationship between price and demand. Well, it may be because he himself is insanely rich and he's never had to worry about not having the money for something he desires. Anyway, apparently over at Wells Fargo, their shares fell 2.3%. This happened toward the end of last week, but there was an outage that disrupted the banking system nationwide, and it was the second outage in a week, and apparently customers were unable to access their accounts. Wells Fargo set withdrawal limits of $100 per day at the ATMs, and that is usually an indicator of a liquidity crisis. For those of you who were worrying if Sears was going to go away, well, maybe not yet. A bankruptcy judge has approved Eddie Lampert's $5.2 billion takeover bid for Sears, and basically said, be careful, don't be a cartoon character. And I think the judge's concern is that Eddie Lampert was at the helm when Sears reached the edge of the bankruptcy. But Eddie managed to get together the funding to basically buy up Sears, and maybe he's got some ideas for turning it around. But it would be a shame to see Sears go. We've lost so many other iconic stores. Aides to Donald Trump are saying that the China trade deal deadline is likely to be extended. They're apparently not making the progress that they wanted to make. And it may be that Trump just needs to keep the deal talk alive to buoy stocks in the face of growing calls for an earnings recession. So, a lot of game playing out there here. The United States and the European Union are going to slap yet more sanctions on Russia. And, of course, now that we're with the Mueller collusion report due any minute, it's time for Trump to once again remind the audience that he is not a BFF with Vladimir Putin. Now, I don't know what Mueller's going to come up with that Senate report saying there's nothing there. But again, if Trump is really doing this just to convince the American people that he is not friends with Vladimir Putin, that's not presidential thinking. You don't make those kinds of decisions, which could ultimately provoke a real war, based on your polling data. Anyway. Now, France, their energy company, Total, we talked about them, they're still operating down in Venezuela. And apparently they made a decision to not invest in Israel for reasons it described as complex, despite Israel's growing role as a gas producer, even though much of that gas is coming out of places Israel technically does not own. Israel turned around and screamed that Total is boycotting Israel and demanding that countries where Total is working immediately impose penalties and fines for this very obvious boycott. Now, Total did not say anything about a boycott. They said the issue was complex, and given exactly where Israel is getting the gas that it's selling, it is a complex issue. And Total may not want to find itself in the middle of an erupting war between Israel and Syria. That would be bad for business. Over in Stockholm, Sweden, Apple has run into a bit of a brick wall, and they're throwing a tantrum. They're severing their ties with the Swedish capital. Apparently, the Stockholm City Council vetoed its plans to build a flagship store at a popular historic park. Now, the reason Apple got very angry, and rightly so, the building, which is currently occupied by a restaurant, was already purchased by Apple a few years ago for about $13 million after the previous city council approved the project for the store. And Apple was infuriated, and I understand why they are. Apparently, the company had made several revisions to the project to better fit its historic location. So I imagine that building will be on the market. Amber Rudd is admitting that they pretty much botched the rollout of the universal credit system, and as a result, more people were driven to greater use of food banks and other charities. Now, this whole monthly benefits was supposed to be up and running by April in 2017. Now they're saying it won't be ready till 2023. Now, the monthly benefits were basically made up of 6 other benefits programs rolled together. And because of all the numerous delays and hangups, those benefits have stopped. And so when universal credit was first started, recipients had to wait 6 weeks for their first handout. That limit's been cut by a week, but it's absolutely clear that the delays in claimants getting their benefits had meant more were forced to turn to food banks. Everybody's running out of money here. And here's a really good analysis. This came out of Brass Check. Why poor countries stay poor. And they're talking about Venezuela, but they could be talking about any country on earth. And it says some of the richest countries in the world are filled with desperately poor people. These are countries that have oil, copper, gold, and other valuable resources, but it doesn't translate to healthy economies for the people. And why not? Well, because the wealth that is generated by those resources is stolen by a handful of local elites who cooperate with foreign looters. And that's it in a nutshell. Now, one of the reasons the United States wanted to get into Venezuela is back when Hugo Chavez was president, the oil was considered a national treasure, and the money from the oil did go to supporting a good economy for the people. And it's one of the reasons Venezuela at that time had one of the highest standards of living in South America. And then the economic war began, and slowly, bit by bit, Venezuela's been whittled down. And corporate media is telling you it's all Maduro's fault, or it's the fault of the socialist government. But Venezuela is a victim here. Okay. All right, talking about immigration and refugees, and I know we already covered it with the border wall here, but here's an interesting story, and I'll bet you they're going to make a movie about it. Apparently, the Mossad and MI6 smuggled an Iranian nuclear scientist who defected to Great Britain in a migrant caravan. So apparently, this Iranian nuclear scientist had previously helped Israeli intelligence plan the assassination of another nuclear scientist inside Iran. Remember all those strange deaths and everything. So this defected Iranian scientist, he's 47 years old, and that's all they're telling us about him, apparently crossed the English Channel on an inflatable raft while hiding among the larger group of migrants. And it's right out of a James Bond movie. So that's interesting. Okay. Hungary is really standing up to the EU, and the EU is not happy about it. Hungary is basically showing the West the path to survival, which is to just close those borders, keep your indigenous population safe, and just look after your own country. So, now George Soros is hitting the panic button because he can see, Britain is about to leave, Italy's talking about leaving, several of the EU countries are talking about this thing is over, this party is over. And so George Soros wrote an opinion piece, Europe may be on the cusp of a nightmare, but it's not too late to wake up. And it starts out, Europe is sleepwalking. Oh, we got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back after this. There we go. All right. As I was saying before the commercial break, George Soros appears to be waking up to the fact that his globalist dreams are starting to crumble. And as you know, this whole idea of these unions, they were going to be, shall we say, the sub-assemblies. He worked to put together the EU first, and then there was going to the North American Union, there was going to be this and thus and such union. Then they would basically glue them all together. But Soros is out there, and he's seeing this pushback. He's seeing Brexit about to happen. He's seeing populist, nationalist politicians sweeping the elections all over Europe. And just the people of Europe saying, enough of this, enough of the open borders, enough of Brussels just meddling in absolutely everything that we do. This is not what we signed up for. Well, as we reported in an earlier story, basically the people of Europe were lied to right from the get-go as to what the real plan was. So Soros wrote this opinion piece out there, basically warning that if the Europeans don't wake up and go back to being loyal members of the European Union, it's going to go the way of the Soviet Union. And so he's clearly upset, and it couldn't happen to a nicer guy. And I resent George Soros because he's not elected by the people. We did not say to George Soros, come on in here and remake the world any way you think it's going to be best. He's a very rich man. He's got a very colorful background, including helping the Nazis round up his fellow Jews. And then he got very rich, literally breaking the Bank of England. And now he's got all these billions and billions of dollars. He's got so much money, just the interest alone is making him richer every single day. And he's giving a lot of it away for his Open Society Foundation, which is his primary instrument of trying to push for a one world global government. And he's now seeing it may not happen. Certainly not in his lifetime. And I'm sure he wanted to have his seat on that golden throne of planet Earth himself at least once. Okay, over at Breitbart, there's a report out where apparently there was actually an offer made by the European Union for a free trade deal exit from the EU. In other words, the EU said, yes, you can Brexit and we will have a free trade deal. The trade will continue. There won't be any disruptions. And Theresa May and her Remainer civil servants apparently secretly sabotaged that offer because all they ever really wanted was Brexit in name only. Theresa May has just betrayed the British voters here. And this is just, it's absolutely outrageous is what it is. Alrighty. Rees-Mogg is responding to rumors of a delay in Brexit by saying that might be something the European Parliament might not want, because if there is a delay, then the British people will vote in the European Parliament elections, and out of anger and frustration, they could have a protest vote for all populist nationalist candidates, and it could cause an EU vote shock. So Brussels is getting into a little bit of a corner there here. Okay. The latest bit of propaganda that's coming on out about Brexit is that pro-Brexit people and Eurosceptics in general, you know, they love Russia. They want to paralyze the EU, and they love Russia. And this report was published by the European Council on Foreign Relations, which is a pro-EU think tank. So, and yes, they get donations from George Soros. So that's the latest spin. If you support independence, you must be a Russian stooge here. Okay, there is a report coming out of the Daily Mail that Theresa May quit this summer. And apparently she's going to basically, as soon as Brexit is over, she's going to step down in order to prevent Boris taking over. So apparently they're floating around the date of March 29th here. Now, China and Britain will be signing a trade deal almost immediately after Brexit. So all this fear-mongering about Britain will be cut off. There'll be no trade. Everybody's going to be starving. Not going to happen. And don't forget, Donald Trump made his promise that after Brexit, the U.S. would immediately sign a trade deal with Great Britain. Now, given the tensions with China, Trump may pull back on that and try and muck it all up by saying, well, Great Britain, if you're going to do business with us, you can't do business with China. And I'm very alarmed at all this weaponization of trade, because it's just adding to the tensions and frictions. Up in Canada, Canadian PM Justin Trudeau is being investigated for illegally attempting to shield engineering firm SNC Lavalin from criminal fraud and corruption charges involving millions of dollars in bribes to the Libyan government. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And up in New York, there's been a very bizarre ramification of the new New York abortion law. And it basically involves this gentleman, Anthony Hobson, who is being tried for the murder of his 35-year-old pregnant girlfriend. And Hobson is facing charges of second-degree murder, tampering with evidence, and criminal weapons possessions for the stabbing. He will not be charged with killing the woman's 5-month-old fetus, because New York's abortion law makes it perfectly legal to kill an unborn child right up to the moment of birth. And I think that's absolutely horrifying. Speaking of being in trial, you've probably already seen this on the news. El Chapo, a.k.a. Joaquin Guzman, was found guilty on all 10 counts in his drug trafficking trial at federal court. And he's yet to be sentenced, but he's 61 years old, and it's pretty much a good bet that he's going to spend the remainder of his life in jail, unless he can dig another tunnel like he did back in January 2016 when he escaped from that Mexican prison, which was amazing here. Speaking of arrests here, over in Great Britain, political correctness time, a British mother was arrested in front of her children and thrown in jail for 7 hours for addressing a transgender activist by the wrong gender on social media. 7 hours. And the police were all up, oh, well, this is antisocial behavior. I mean, now, here is an interesting story, and this is a phenomenon which is happening a lot. It is not being covered by the corporate media. It flies against the agenda of the liberals, but it's called detransitioning. And that is that people who have been convinced they need to change sex physically with hormones and sex change surgery are deciding it didn't work. It's not really resolving their problems, and so they go back. And one of them, Walt Hayer, is saying that the media and doctors misled him to believe that a sex change was the answer to his gender dysphoria. So apparently he was 42 when he began taking hormones and underwent sex change surgery, including genital reconfiguration and breast implants. His doctors told him it was the only solution to his gender distress, and I'm sure they made a huge amount of money off of that. But apparently, Hayer explained in an op-ed published in USA Today, he's now 77 years old, he detailed his transition from a man to a woman, then back to being a man 8 years later. And he says, after detransitioning, I know the truth. Hormones and surgery may alter appearances, but nothing changes the immutable fact of your sex. Hear that, Bruce Jenner? And you will hear the media say regret is rare, but they're not reading my inbox, which is full of messages from transgender individuals who want the life and body back that was taken from them by cross-sex hormone surgery and living under a new identity. Transgenderism is not being diagnosed, it's being sold, and I'm still not sure what the agenda for that is. Maybe it's just to make money, to give these people, oh yeah, you're not really a guy, you're really a woman. Hey, well, let's get out your insurance card. We'll whack off the parts you don't need anymore. Over in Oxford University, they're getting ready to overhaul their classics department because men are getting higher scores than women. And so Oxford University is going to redesign its Latin and Greek language department in order to make sure the women are getting the same grades as the men. Well, doesn't that disincentivize achievement? I mean, the whole point of being in a university is to strive for academic excellence, not take it away when it's actually accomplished. I mean, that's counterproductive. Somebody works really hard and they get a good grade, and then somebody comes along and says, oh, well, that's not really fair to these other people who weren't studying as hard, so we're going to give them the same grade as you. Why would anybody study after that? Over at Yale University, the Yale Daily News literally published a guide to destroying white boys' lives using Stasi tactics. And it was just this incredible hate-filled speech by the paper's opinion editor, Isis Davis Marks. And again, this open animosity for whites, we could wind up in the same situation as South Africa and Zimbabwe. And it's very, if anybody wrote this kind of stuff about blacks, they would be crucified in the media here. All right, I'm going to skip on down here, and because we're getting short on time here, and I want to spend a little time with human-caused global warming, because Winter Storm Maya is now on its way in for many parts of the country. This is going to be the third hit in a row. And the corporate media is still out there trying to say, oh, this is all caused by global warming. It's all caused by global warming. The oceans are so hot, and that's why more moisture is getting into the air, and that's what's leading to the snow. And no, it doesn't really work that way. In fact, right now, because of what's putting clouds up in the air is, again, the low solar activity and cosmic rays. But they're still trying to figure out some way that they can sell this idea that all of this cold weather is global warming, and that you should still be willing to pay a carbon tax and obey a global climate authority. And it's utter nonsense. And they keep changing the story. First it was the Arctic polar vortex, and then when that one was demolished, now it's down to, oh, the oceans are incredibly warm, and there's more moisture, and therefore there's more snow. Well, little basic thermodynamic understanding. If there's more water in the air and the temperature is the same, you're going to get more rain, not more snow. The temperature has to drop for that moisture to become snow. And apparently right now, over 1,700 flights are canceled as snow and ice halt travel from mid-Atlantic to Midwest. Apparently 100,000 are without power. And this is hitting from New York City to Minneapolis. Significant travel delays. Well, yeah, I would imagine that here. Apparently, disruptive snow and ice are also targeting the Midwest, including in and around Detroit and Chicago. It snowed in Las Vegas. That is very rare. Apparently, the Las Vegians, if you will, were out there with their cell phones and cameras, just flooding social media. Look at this. We've got snow in Las Vegas. Because it is a rare event. It has happened before, but it's very, very uncommon. And, of course, Donald Trump was out there tweeting that how nice it would be to actually have some of that global warming right now. And that drew a response from Wisconsin Congressman that Trump is a moron for not believing in human-caused global warming. Apparently, in Wisconsin, hundreds of schools in the region canceled classes through Wednesday, and the governors of Wisconsin and Michigan declared states of emergency amid wind chills as low as minus 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay. Over in Russia, in the Arctic archipelago of Novaya Zemlya, they've declared a state of emergency following an invasion of polar bears. And apparently on this very small island, over 50 polar bears are basically seeking food and harassing residents. Now remember back when Al Gore and all of his carbon Nazis were saying, oh, the polar bears are going extinct. They're all going to drown. Polar bears can swim. They can float. They can even stay afloat asleep. They've been known to swim 60 miles. Now, the co-founder of Greenpeace, Patrick Moore, is out there warning that this Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez Green New Deal is a disaster. He said it's a recipe for mass suicide and the most ridiculous scenario I ever heard. And he was being interviewed by the New American, and he said it's the completely preposterous prescriptions in the scheme. If they were actually implemented, Americans could be forced to turn to cannibalism to avoid starvation, and they still would not survive. Now, that's a little alarmist, but there's absolutely no question. The plan is unworkable. It can't be paid for. I mean, there are a couple of things in there that I like planting more green plants. Apparently somebody went out to college campuses to get their sense of it, and college students are all supportive of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's Green New Deal until they actually read it, and then they quickly back down. And this is what we get from selling policy as popularity. Oh, Alexandria, oh, it must be good. No, not necessarily. And these are kids who are supposed to be in college, who are supposed to be educated on how to think and analyze and read and discover. And instead, they're acting like a personality cult. Oh, it's Ocasio-Cortez. Her green plan must be good here. Remember, it wasn't all that long ago that the governor of California, Jerry Brown, just before he left office, quietly signed 2 laws to seriously modify the worst of the state's fire management policy missteps. And these were the policy missteps Donald Trump had talked about during the California fires, saying, no, it's not climate change. There were these overlapping environmental rules, making fuel load reductions in forest and coastal chaparral nearly impossible. Hostility toward commercial timber harvesting allowed a massive buildup in tree density and brush with a concurrent reduction of access roads and fire breaks. Remember, I was telling you about those fire breaks. And, of course, corporate media said, oh, yeah, it's human-caused global warming. No matter what happens, it's human-caused global warming. Over at my ClimateGate page, I have an article far from complete on the literally hundreds of things that are being blamed on human-caused global warming. And some of them are really out there. Okay, we're going to take a phone call. Art off the grid, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Boy, we could talk about that Green New Deal all day long, couldn't we?
Could we?
But
yes.
We were talking about the lowering of standards at the universities because men were scoring higher than women. It kind of reminds me, go back, 5-6 years ago, when we first heard the first reports of something like this that I heard came out of Washington State, when the public schools were going to lower the standards for the final exams for testing. Because black students were having a hard time competing as far as scores go with white students. They had to lower the standards for passing. And I said then, you wait, this is going to spread out.
Yes.
And it's going to become a nationwide thing. And we saw over the past 5-6 years since then, we've seen how the standards in our public schools have dropped down to the point where nobody loses, nobody fails. I mean, it's really ridiculous, right to the point of they actually, in many states, lowered the standards for the testing of police in order to become a police because blacks could not score as well as whites. So they had to lower the standards there. And we see this happening in almost every respect, whether it's the schools or jobs or career, whatever it might happen to be, the standards are being lowered to where, those like the students that really put forth the effort and really try, the people at jobs, you work a job for 5 years and you give it your all, and then, come time for promotion, they give a promotion to a guy that's been there for 7 years, even though he's not as productive as you are because he's a minority or some other kind of crazy crap like that. It's ridiculous, Mike. It really is. We have to, and so I'm at the point now where I'm starting to wonder, when are we going to care more about personal accomplishment rather than, I don't even know what word to use. Do you know what I'm saying?
Well, it's basically placating the masses, and I saw it, over the years. I very, very briefly taught remedial math at the high school level in Southern California, and we were dealing with it back then, where the agenda was we were going to work with the students who didn't really want to study, and we were just going to cajole and coerce them to just come up to this basic minimum. Meanwhile, there were kids in class who were obviously very bright, wanted to learn, and they were just being completely neglected. Now, how do you build a strong, healthy economy if you're disincentivizing achievement and accomplishment at the school level and the business level? And you're right, it's demoralizing for people to work at a company and be very productive and try and do a good job, and then the promotion goes to a minority person. It's a quota system, and it's discrimination in reverse. But right now in this country, it is impossible to say that some people are just better at certain things than others. It always has been. It goes back to that all men are created equal, which is good politics but bad science. But even back, in the 70s and 80s, there were research studies that came out that said different ethnic groups had different intellectual abilities, and it's racism, you can't do that. And that's when we started getting all the quota systems. And it's, absolutely, it's bad for the country. It's bad for the country because students don't have a good reason to push hard in school. People who are at work, they don't have a good reason to try and do a better job. And so we have shoddy education, we have shoddy businesses, we have shoddy products, and it's part of the reason our empire is in decline.
Yeah, it is. And I remember when my nieces and nephews were in school, I've got some, and this is not just because they're my nieces and nephews. This is honesty here. They are very, very bright. And they would come home, they would sit, they would study, they'd put forth the extra effort. They were active in extracurricular activities in school because they really wanted to show that I can do this, And then, when we started seeing the lowering of the standards, I had one of my nieces came to me one day and she said, "Uncle," she said, "it's almost not even worth the effort to do, to really try to achieve anything because I'm not being rewarded for my effort." And I said, "Honey, that's just the way it is nobody cares anymore." And that's why, like you said, even in jobs and businesses, we see such a decline because there's no incentive to motivate want to do better.
All right, well, listen, Art, I'm going to have to let you go. We got to take a commercial break. Back with the last segment of our program today after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of our program today, and getting on back to the issue of education and what direction it's going. Apparently, Christian lawmakers in 6 Republican-controlled state legislatures are pushing for laws that would allow public schools to offer elective classes on the New and Old Testaments. And apparently, President Trump seems to think this is a really good idea, forgetting about that wall of separation between church and state and not showing respect to any one religion over any other. Because if they have elective classes on the Bible, then you're going to have some Muslims coming on up and demanding, well, we've got to have elective classes on Islam. And if it goes to the Supreme Court would say, yeah, it's all or nothing. That's the way it's supposed to work here. But getting on back to this, isn't that what Sunday school is for? Look how many churches dot the landscapes. That's where you go to learn about the Bible. And how does learning about how many angels can dance on the head of a pin prepare these children for the job market? And that's where these kids are really being harmed. Indoctrination, now religion, and they're not getting the skills they need to be competitors in the global market. This is supposed to be our labor pool to rebuild our manufacturing with. And I think they're being shortchanged. Over in Africa, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, health officials are warning that the Ebola outbreak rages on. It is spreading, and it's infecting more people, and it's spread further. So apparently this outbreak has also prompted health workers to begin administering an experimental Ebola vaccine. But questions about its efficacy have arisen lately as the Associated Press reported that some of those who received the experimental Ebola vaccine have become infected with Ebola. So here we go again. The vaccine is supposed to protect you, and instead it gives you the disease. This one has about a 50% lethality rate. And even if you survive it, you're scarred for life here. Okay, there's a survey conducted by medical researchers at Orlando Health Arnold Palmer Hospital for Children show that half of parents worry the flu shot could make their children sick. A third of parents don't believe it works at all. It's just another scam here. And now we have more and more stories coming on out about Andrew Zimmerman. Now, he's a world-renowned pediatric neurologist, and he was always the go-to guy for denials that there was a link between vaccines and autism. Well, now apparently he's come forward and said that years ago he privately told government lawyers that yes, vaccines can and do cause autism, and that was hushed up. All right, there's the music. Time for me to get on out of here. Please stay tuned for John Stedmiller. I'm sure that he's got lots of interesting things to share with you. Please share what you learn here with everybody that you know. Please donate, and we'll talk to you tomorrow. Aloha, America.